Welcome to the event this evening, which is titled Breathing Worlds. So I'm Emma Ridgway. I'm the Chief Curator at Modern Art Oxford. I head up the exhibitions and learning. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Modern Art Oxford, it's one of the leading contemporary art institutions in the UK and has been commissioning new creative projects for over 50 years. In fact, it's got quite a history of participatory projects, which is a subject we'll talk about this evening. The first one, in fact, was in 1966. It was called Space Place. And that was a dramatic architectural installation through the galleries. And it was a physical frame to invite in young artists to do performances, such as Yoko Ono as one of the young performers. And here we are in 2020, all together, framed by this online format for this event, Breathing Worlds, which is a live discussion of the political, personal and environmental world we breathe in. So it's part of Breathworks, and Breathworks is an online participation project, which some of you will have joined in with already, which explores experiences of breathing. And it's led by Lucy Sabin, and Breathworks invited the public to engage with creative storytelling about breathing. So throughout 2020, Modern Art Oxford, prompted by Lucy, invited participants to contribute their own breathwork by capturing experiences of breathing via an image and a sound recording. And the result is a beautiful collection of personal stories about this most essential of experiences. So Breathworks was started at Modern Art Oxford by our creative associate, our first digital creative associate, which is Lucy Sabin, before the 2020 health crisis started. And the idea was to explore a wide range of scenarios that remind us of our breath. It's also part of the public programme of the Humanities cultural programme at Torch, which is the Oxford Research Centre for the Humanities, an amazing organisational kind of feat who work across the university and with many cultural partners. And we're delighted that the Breathworks principal investigator for Torch is Derek McCormack, who you're going to meet this evening too. So Lucy, as I mentioned, is our associate creative, and she's an interdisciplinary practitioner. In her work, she brings together research and art and design, and she's interested in the relationship between humans and the atmosphere, particularly exploring air as an ecological and social necessity for surviving and also perceiving. Patsy Isles, welcome to the discussion now too. Patsy is a writer, and she's also a Kundalini and Hatha yoga teacher. She's particularly interested in the transformational power of breath. Patsy is a creative wellbeing associate with Words of Colour, which is a social enterprise that supports and empowers writers of colour. She's also the co-founder of Black Yoga and Wellbeing Collective, which is a group of professionals actively increasing the visibility of people of colour in the wellbeing industry. Alice Sharp is our third speaker. Alice is the artistic director of Invisible Dust, which she founded in 2009. And Invisible Dust commissions leading artists and scientists to produce new artworks that spark rich conversations around environmental concerns. So Alice has worked with many artists, including Elizabeth Price, Jeremy Deller, Faisal Abdul Allah, Martin Parr, Tacita Dean, to name just a few. And she's curated numerous projects, which range from Offshore, which is artists exploring the sea as part of the whole UK City of Culture, and also Under Her Eye, which was a real world first as a conference forum that brought together activists and artists and scientists engaging with climate change who all happened to be women. Our final speaker of today is Derek McCormack. He's the Professor of Cultural Geography at the University of Oxford and a Fellow at Mansfield College, Oxford. Derek's research explores the meteorological and affective systems of the atmosphere across art and science, geopolitics, and popular culture. And in a few minutes, we'll hear from each speaker, and then they'll discuss the different ideas together around the event. And with this particular event, we decided that because breathing is about inspiration and exploration, that we'd begin and later conclude the event with collective breathing exercises generously led by Patsy Isles. So Patsy, if you would take us forward, please.
Thank you, Emma. So we're going to do a breath meditation, which is called the 4-part energizing breath. And actually what we do with this is we break up our inhaling breath and our exhaling breath into 4 equal parts, or actually sniffs, and I'll show you in a second. What we do is we break it up into the 4 parts, and on the 4th part, we fill the lungs completely. And we do exactly the same on the exhale. We break it into 4 parts, and on the final exhale, we just completely empty our lungs. So it will look something like this. So just breaking it up into 4 parts, really hearing those sniffs. Now, if you've eaten within the last hour, please go really easy on those inhaling breaths. And just really, because it's very, very kind of taxing on your stomach. What I'll do is I'll keep count for the first few rounds and kind of show you how, just to kind of guide you through. And then we'll end with just a couple of long, deep breaths. So actually the best thing I think to do is to start by sitting up nice and straight, making sure that your spine is nice and straight, just relaxing the shoulders down. And I'm going to invite you to, if you're comfortable, to close down your eyes. And if you're uncomfortable, maybe just directing your gaze down towards the floor, just cutting out any of the surroundings away from you. And what I'm going to get us all to do together, we're going to take just 3 deep inhales before we go into our 4-part energizing breath. So together, let's take a nice deep inhale. And exhale. Inhale again, just through the nose. And exhale. And inhale one last time. And exhale. And keeping your eyes closed, I'm going to count you through the exercise, the 4-part breath. Inhale will be the first count. So when you hear me say inhale, you'll take your first sniff. Okay, let's go. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. 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 And continue on, inhaling 4-part breath, exhaling 4-part exhale, just on your own, in your own rhythm. And make this your last round. And together we're just going to take a nice, long, deep inhale just to end that short breath activity. So one deep inhale together. Exhale completely and fully. Great, well done. So I'm now going to pass you over to the first speaker for tonight, and that's Lucy Sabin.
Thank you, Patsy. That was so centering. So this evening, I would like to briefly trace the evolution of Breathworks. So this project highlights experiences of breathing in a nutshell. And Breathworks has transformed, it's morphed really from an online campaign and exhibition into an events programme and collection of gallery installations. And the unexpected growth of Breathworks is symptomatic, I think, of recent world events and the adaptive responses taken by our team and the art sector as a whole. Breathworks began as a digital participatory arts project. Its genesis was overseen by myself and André Lavam, digital curator at Modern Art Oxford. But there was lots of shared decision-making with volunteers. And in particular, we facilitated a series of focus groups in order to co-design a replicable method for producing a breathwork. First, make an image. Second, record some sound. And third, upload via the online form. At the gallery, we added a circular sound wave to marry image with audio. As the online exhibition expanded, the sound wave became central to the project's visual identity. It was important to establish a structured approach with 3 or so stages early on, and not just for reasons of aesthetic cohesion. First, we needed to keep in mind social media parameters and online behaviours. Second, the repetition of a clear method afforded Breathworks potential research value as an empirical experiment. So what were we investigating? Our intention was to inquire after people's relationship with breathing. We wondered what salient experiences would surface through creative expression. Back in January, of course, we were not to know that breath and breathlessness would become so political and so palpable throughout the course of this year. And I'm sure we will explore the eerie timeliness of the project throughout the course of our discussion today. In the art world, there came a normative urge to give voice or to listen to more diverse audiences, to provide free and accessible resources to young people stuck at home, and to invite a collective digital space that might ease isolation and anxiety. I'm not saying that we were able to do all of that. There was so much to learn in such little time, and there still is. In any case, I personally felt a creative urgency like never before. And this sense of creative urgency clearly resonated with those who submitted a breathwork. And now I would like to read out a list of the insightful observations made by our contributors. Their images, sounds, and stories captured in no particular order. The sheer volume of air breathed each day. Breaths taken between words and between waking. Breathing to reconnect with oneself. A kiss. Breathing to reconnect with nature. Breath as a mind tool or mantra. Breath as a powerhouse in martial arts. Breathing beneath and through a face covering. Experiencing asthma and measuring or quantifying your exhale. Lung cancer and the memories of laboured breath. Neonatal ventilators and an archived umbilical cord. Medical scans. Presence and absence. The noise your fridge makes. A marker pen attached to a rotary fan. Ways of recording breath chaotically with ink. A poem entitled Air Wild, with the line, bloom, breathe, mother my atmosphere. Climate change, forest fires, and the destruction of Earth's lungs. Birdsong conjured by tiny disembodied lungs. The word for breath in various languages, and its etymological links to ancient deities and half-forgotten cosmologies. Breath as paralinguistic, communication beyond words. Shadows and blurred images. A scattering of dandelion seeds. Breathing alongside plants. Wind making patterns in barley. A wave at the shore. As these findings demonstrate, breath can highlight both microcosmic stirrings and seismic ripples everywhere. I would not be the first to suggest that an attentiveness to breath points to a kind of political ecology. And by that, I mean a way of sensing and studying the relationships between human communities and environmental concerns, a turning inwards to turn outwards. Breathing Worlds was the next stage of the project. It was a move towards situating breathworks within an academic constellation. At this point, I joined forces with Professor Derek McCormack, who joins us tonight, whose own research and teaching at the University of Oxford explore cultural geographies of the atmosphere. Together, we decided to systematically curate and display recent research on breath-related matters. Our approach became a form of collage. As Lisa M. Given explains, collage is an arts-based research approach to meaning-making through the juxtaposition of a variety of pictures, artifacts, natural objects, words, phrases, textiles, sounds, stories. I could go on. Our installation at Modern Art Oxford became a nebulous 7x3 metre configuration of printed materials, an assemblage of photographs, infographics, sketches, and painstakingly selected quotations. Eventually, through collaborative efforts, the content was assorted into 8 areas, or breathing worlds, if you will. There was breathing experience, breathing health, breathing environment, breathing politics, breathing violence, breathing technology, breathing art, and breathing is. The composition somewhat emulated the elementary properties of aerial matter. So we deliberately ensured that the print media were visually and thematically floating, so that the ideas did not belong to any one world and could easily cross-pollinate. Their mattering was therefore diffuse, with an impact over here and over there and in the white space in between. And these spatial relations allow the observer to draw interesting and perhaps unusual connections. So a quote from one breather might speak to a photograph from another. And our job in producing the Breathing Worlds installation was simply to facilitate a lively conversation between these areas of research. The perceived connections are, of course, subjective, as is the overall curation. Others would arrange or encounter the content differently, and in so doing foment a fresh understanding of the linkages between environmental, social, and aesthetic practices or theories to do with breath. So in sum, Breathing Worlds highlighted interrelating accounts of the ways in which breath is experienced, practiced, performed, imagined, reimagined, aestheticized, given meaning, mythologized, revered, ignored, exploited, dehumanized, post-humanized, transformed, controlled, sensed, quantified, recorded, evaluated, standardized, communicated, mapped, politicized, racialized, gendered, classed, pathologized, contaminated, weathered, biologically mimicked, artificially reconstructed, recycled, and shared. I hope you can visit the works at the gallery or online. It's definitely worth having a look at the individual breathworks submitted by the community on the Modern Art Oxford website. So on that note, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Patsy Isles.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. 2020 has been defined by our relationship to our own, but also our collective breath, and undoubtedly has been challenging for all of us. Even before the summer was punctuated with protests led by the rallying call, "I can't breathe," we had disappeared behind closed doors and windows to shield against an invisible enemy that has spread globally and literally become the equivalent of World War III. As a nation, we held our collective breath, forced to reflect on our own mortality as the death toll touched so many of us, and even now continues to rise. COVID-19, George Floyd. In my world, as a Black British woman of Caribbean heritage, living in the diaspora, these two seemingly incongruous events are linked by two things: our breath or lack thereof, and systemic racism. We've all seen the COVID-19 death statistics. We all now know that people of colour are disproportionately affected, even while we are caring, nursing, and transporting everyone else around. We've met the virus head on and paid for it with our lives. We've now all seen the video footage of George Floyd, and we can no longer deny that systemic racism exists, not just in the US, but also here in the UK. And it was in this context that I became involved in Breathe 846. So I'm just going to stop here briefly to give you a taste of the Breathe 846 project by sharing a very short video with you.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
I can't breathe. We can't breathe.
Support one another.
To fight for our freedom,
We have nothing to lose but our change.
we need to breathe. Breathe to reflect. Breathe to recharge. Breathe to refocus. Let's breathe together. Drama, journaling, meditations on art with the National Gallery, mindfulness, craft, poetry, musical performance, film, physical exercise. Breathe, starting 25th of June at breathe846.uk.
Breathe 846 was an online project developed by Blackout UK with Survivors UK as a response to the murder of George Floyd. The project acknowledged the impact this was having on the mental health of Black men and consisted of video interventions to help them A, find ways to initiate their own self-healing, B, discover organisations they could seek support from, and C, mourn both George Floyd and the many others we've lost to police brutality and racism here in the UK. People like Rashawn Charles, Edson DaCosta, Sarah Reed, Jimmy Mubenga, David Oluwale, and the list goes on. Each of the video interventions in the project lasted 8 minutes and 46 seconds, the exact time it took for George Floyd to take his final breath. And from mindfulness to song, poetry to art, Black men could take time out to breathe, reflect, and come together in an online space to initiate self-healing. My contribution, a breath meditation, was a tool to relieve anxiety during a time of deep turmoil and mental anguish in the Black community. We live our whole life within the space of an inhale and an exhale. Unconsciously, our breath oxygenates the blood in our arteries, delivers that oxygen to every cell in our body, and provides us with the energy we need to live. And in yogic philosophy, we think of the breath as pranayama. Prana meaning breath, yama meaning control. And as a yoga teacher and creative well-being practitioner with the social enterprise Words of Colour, I'm particularly interested in the transformational power of the controlled breath. And let me share with you why. 4 years ago, I was sat in a hospital waiting room. You know, the kind of bland, nondescript room, especially for people with seriously ill relatives. Earlier, my mum had been rushed to hospital. She could barely lie down flat, had ankles swollen with edema, and was struggling to breathe. After a grim-faced doctor came to tell us that my mum wasn't doing so well, that her lungs were drowning in fluid, and that she was in heart failure, all I remember my brother saying was, we'd better prepare ourselves for the worst. We were lucky. Doctors were able to identify the reason for her heart failure, and slowly but surely, over a number of weeks, we got her back. And as part of her healing, my mum and I committed to practicing a daily breath meditation together. Now, at 77 years old, she was reluctant at first, admittedly. Then eventually she began to feel a difference. She moved more easily without becoming breathless. She could walk far further than she'd been able to before, and she had a lot more energy. And even after Mum was able to return home, she continued her breath meditation. She now practices this for 20 minutes each day, and we're about to celebrate her 81st birthday. Mum believes this meditation, or more accurately, the control of her breath, has saved her life. And so in the world where I breathe, there's still so much work to do, but we are in a time of great transformation. We have fantastic and committed allies of all colours, creeds and races. We're seeing companies commit to reviewing inequalities at board level. This month, more than ever, Black history is celebrating the significant contributions of Black people in this country and globally. We are hearing the voices of those who are voiceless. So to end, I'd like to leave you with a short quote from Maya Angelou that inspires us all to reflect on our breath and how we move forward together in this world. As long as you're breathing, it's never too late to do something good. So now I'm going to hand over to Alice, the next speaker on this evening's panel. Thank you.
Hello, that was very moving, Patsy, thank you. My name's Alice Sharp. I'm the Artistic Director of Invisible Dust, and we work between artists and scientists, creating artworks to create a personal connection to the climate crisis and our environment. I thought I'd just talk a little bit more about Invisible Dust's beginnings, because we are very interweaved with breath at Invisible Dust, and we're connected to that from the start. A little bit about how art and science enables us to value our breath and make the invisible visible. And then to just have a couple of videos of artworks that we've done. We've done a lot of work around, in particular, air pollution and breathing. And I thought that Dryden Goodwin's Breathe, which connects me to both Lucy and Derek, would be a good one to show. And also to talk about a project called Human Sensor, which was by an artist called Kasia Mulga, which was a very sort of futuristic thing and very interesting with the current COVID situation that we all find ourselves in. So how did Invisible Dust start? So I'm going to just go over to a screen, share my screen, and hopefully this is all going to work fine. Okay, so, okay, let's hope that's all. Oh, for some reason it's okay at this moment. It's all course gone dark, and why? Sorry for everybody. Oh, okay, just hope, let me just go again. Sorry about that, everybody. Let's hope the second time round it works all right. Let's just do a little bit with my computer. Okay. I'll try again. Share screen. Of course, it always works all right in the practice. And then, is that all working all right now, everybody? I have a nod from somebody. Yes, good. Okay. Right. So at Invisible Dust, we work between artists and scientists looking at climate change and the climate crisis. And we started out by me meeting a scientist called Peter Brimbakum. And Peter is an atmospheric chemist, which is a very interesting thing to meet somebody who studies the atmosphere. And he looks at how dust changes. And when I met him and I said to him, look, I'm interested in working between artists and scientists, I said, how do you look at air pollution? And he said, we measure dust through time. And I thought this sounds like an artist project rather than a scientist project. And I thought this is something really interesting that we could look at. And I found out very quickly, looking at air pollution, that this whole idea about the invisibility of air pollution is really because the pollution that we're all breathing in is very, very tiny. And that a big long thing that you can see in the middle of this picture is actually a human hair. And the bigger particle is petrol and the smaller one is diesel. And what I found out is that the diesel particles are the things that are doing really a lot of harm to us in our bodies, because they're going straight into our lungs and then into our bloodstream. And the interesting thing with the scientists I was working with is they started to use artist pictures to explain what had happened with air pollution. So Peter looked at these sort of images, which were looking at the Thames, Monet, Turner, painting these kind of huge vivid skies, which were part of the sort of Industrial Revolution. and coal-powered pollution. So of course, when you were breathing that in, you'd really feel it in your chest. And of course, we changed our skies now. No longer we had the Clean Air Act, and our skies are no longer full of that sort of pollution, but in fact, invisible air pollution, which is majority from vehicles. And so I said to Peter, how are you going to show the modern day air pollution? And he said, well, that's a very good question. And that's something that's kind of really come up to me a lot when I've been discussing it with people. And so I said to him, well, let's see if artists can look at this and see if we can come up with some new ways of looking at this invisible air pollution. And so we worked with King's College London, and the scientist in the picture who's in the background there is looking at testing young children who are 8 years old. And this is right back now in about 2010. And they were looking to see whether they could create something called the low emission zone, which is now in the whole of London, which is about stopping the big vans coming in and polluting in London. And we worked with classes of school children of 8 years old, and the artist came up with this brilliant idea to do ink breath drawings. So it's a really nice kind of lead into the project we're doing today. The children would blow the ink and with their straws and make these lovely drawings, which they really enjoyed doing. And I just worked out when I looked at this picture earlier that this young lad that we can see here is now 18 years old. So that's quite an amazing time to be working on air pollution projects. I mean, some people would say it shows how old I am, but it's really great to kind of see the legacy of some of these projects in what Lucy's achieved in the gallery. And I'm then going to come on to Dryden's work, which I think is really important in our history, really, as Invisible Dust. So I'm just going to see if I can get see if it's going to actually get bigger. No, sorry. Okay, let's forget about that. It's for some reason not getting big. So I hope you can see this image anyway. It's basically Dryden had this amazing idea of drawing his own son. The actual drawings are about that big, and his son was 6 years old, and he got him to jump up and down in the studio, run about, and then he drew these beautiful images, probably about 1,000 images of his son, and then animated them on top of, and we had about 2 years where we had to get permission. We managed to do it on top of St Thomas's Hospital opposite the House of Parliament. And the idea was the child was on top of the roof and was experiencing the air, was kind of taking the air into their body. And when we were doing this project, Dryden learnt that children are much worse affected by air pollution than adults because their lungs are developing. And so actually, when you see things like the tiny little pushchairs where they lower the babies really low to the ground, that's really bad news because it's very near the exhaust pipes of the cars. So there's some interesting things that you kind of discover through these things, which have then made the projects. So let me just see if I can get into Dryden's. So I'm just going to show you a really small excerpt of a film that was made about Dryden's work.
I was intrigued to have a conversation with Professor Frank Kelly and the potential to respond to some of the underlying ideas and phenomena, and how his research gave a very particular sense of the body.
I hope the image of the shifting rhythms of the breathing, sometimes regular, sometimes faulty, sometimes laboured, can create a consciousness of the act of breathing.
So that's a really amazing opportunity we had to show something which was really incredibly heartfelt. This child up on this building, it was kind of, you felt this kind of sense of vulnerability of the child with what was going on around breathing in the London air pollution. And then we worked on several other projects, but I think it was important really to focus on this one at this point, which is the human sensor. So Invisible Dust has kind of been interested in working with technology for quite a long time, and this project was developed around 2015. We worked with Kasia Mulga, and she came up with this amazing idea to create this wearable. Now the wearable is particularly astounding because it changes colour with the air pollution. So as people are wearing it and they walk down a street, I don't know if people know much about air pollution, but air pollution is much worse at traffic jam lights, at roundabouts, where anyone is stalling is where the air pollution levels go right up. So if you imagine these dancers, because we worked with on a performance, walking down a street, when they get to the air pollution going up, then the wearables will change colour from a white to a red. depending on which air pollution gas they're connected to. So, for example, if it's PM10, they go towards the lights, and then the wearables change colour. The other thing that was really amazing about them is that they have got sensors in the mouthpieces, so the lights actually go on and off with the breathing. So you have this real sense of the body, and they don't feel like they're sort of separate to the human. It's very, very kind of part of the body experience. So I'll just go into a little video to show you a bit more about the human sensor. And is the sound working all right, everybody? Yeah.
As soon as people see these masks across the faces, they suddenly say to us, what's happening here? Is this something about the air?
It's like smoking, you know, we all know that it's bad. You just need to see how bad things actually are.
Art is not about being didactic, it's about kind of intriguing in order for a viewer to start asking more questions. Art can connect people with science on a very human level. It aesthetically looks beautiful. We've been working with...
So I'm afraid I can't show you any more than that because I'm trying to keep to time, but there's more. The whole video is on our website, so you can see more about the human sensor. And I think just sort of showing the kind of, one of the things that was really striking for us, and I think it comes through lots of the things that we're talking about today, is that breathing is a universal thing. And for us, once we made the human sensor, the video was actually shown throughout the world, and we would see it being sort of kind of retweeted and resent around, you know, Istanbul, Beijing, and it really showed that art can have this resonance with people wherever they are on these kind of things, which, you know, really brought the power of the kind of universal nature of the art. So thank you very much to both Emma and Lucy and Derek for the opportunity to present, and I'm just going to hand over to Derek.
Thanks very much, Alice, and also thanks Patsy and Lucy. What I wanted to say was just a little bit about how my involvement in this project unfolded. I first heard about Breathworks in late March after Lucy reached out via email to talk about a possible collaboration involving modern art, Oxford and Torch. And as it turned out, my involvement in the project consisted of, I guess, 3 parts. The first was my own research and teaching interests. So as Emma suggested earlier on, I've been writing and thinking about atmospheres in both a meteorological and emotional sense, often via very simple device, the balloon. And then some of my teaching has been organized around the elements. So currently teaching a master's course that's organized around earth, air, fire, water, etc. So breathing cuts across those interests, not least because it's about, I guess, how our bodies are enveloped by and exposed to different worlds and the conditions of those worlds. The themes of the project also captured a sense of the circumstances of the present, at least for me anyway. So breathing, I guess, is a particular way of thinking about how the present feels, or what we might call the presencing of the present. And it kind of foregrounds how feelings of the present are tensed between, on the one hand, constraint and constriction, and on the other hand, some sense that we might be able to do things better and might be able to live and be in different ways. So disruptive as it was, COVID-19, I suppose, has really provided a reminder of these sorts of questions. It's highlighted the fact that breathing is not something that was always taken for granted by lots of people. They were already constrained and constricted and suffocated by different forms of exposure to toxicity, pollution, and a range of different forms of violence. And in the midst of the pandemic, as Patsy reminded us, this refrain of "I can't breathe," which is itself far from new, began to resound with particular force in the wake of the killing of George Floyd. In the Breathing Worlds research space at Modern Art Oxford, Lucy and I tried to gather some of these issues together. We read around and through work in the humanities and social sciences, art and forms of activism on breath and breathing. And it's very clear that there's a growing volume of work in those areas on these questions, on the measurement, meaning and politics of breath and breathing, on different ways in which both implicate us all, humans and non-humans, in the conditions of different worlds. But the project also resonated with my ongoing experience. I confess I didn't feel amazing at the time that Lucy reached out initially, and I wasn't really thinking much about much beyond the labors of getting through every or any particular day. And like many others in those circumstances, the rhythms of breathing had for me become more unsettled, problematic, and monitored. So in early April 2020, it was my first time out of the house during lockdown. I'd asked my partner what happens those days when you meet someone on the pavement, and we talked of new rules of distance, of approach and passing. And I almost made it to the end of the street. A man came around the corner vaping. He crossed the road in front of me. In the cold air, his vaping left a cloud which just hung there, drifting slowly. And to walk on, I realized, would be to walk through it. And all I could think of was aerosol. And I realized that the pass this person was to be exposed to his exhalations. And I turned suddenly and began walking back home, but not fast enough to avoid catching that scent of something sickly, sweetened, that makes you wonder what else is in the air. It's September the 9th, and it's the radiology department at the Churchill Hospital. And I'm asked to lie down. He takes my arm, finds a vein, and then describes the procedure. The machine will tell you what to do, he said. The platform slides me through the scanner. That first synthesized instruction, hold your breath. So I stop midway through an out breath, eager to obey the machine, holding still in a kind of X-rayed pause, which in turn is broken by a further simple instruction, breathe. It's October the 9th. Again, the Churchill, this time respiratory outpatients, a lung function test. This test, or tests, seem more involved, interactive, participatory. They begin with an invitation to breathe into a small handheld device, a pheno test, fractional exhaled nitric oxide test. I learned that in addition to being found in air with higher levels of pollution, nitric oxide is also produced in the body as a result of inflammation in the airways. What follows then are a series of tests with a more elaborate armatured machine connected to a digital display, a spirometer, which reassuringly for me anyway, has a plastic balloon attached, the presence of which I just interpret as simply for my own benefit. The spirometer measures various things: slow vital lung capacity, or how much air you can blow out in a gentle sigh until your lungs are empty; forced expiratory volume, or how much air you can blow out rapidly, as fast as you can in a second; forced vital capacity, the volume of air you can exhale in one continuous breath after a deep breath. The technician guides me through each of these tests with animated gestural instructions. They help, but also amplify my sense of breathing as performance or work. Some of my efforts are better than others, and I improve when I focus on the line traced by my efforts on the screen in front of me. I can influence its speed, direction, and shape. It shoots up almost vertically when I exhale rapidly, and then edges slowly down as I try to expel everything in my lungs before bottoming out and returning to its regular rhythm. The technician remarks that I seem very interested in all of this, that I ask a lot of questions. And then I tell her about my participation in this project, and things come in a very, very strange way, full circle. So these kinds of moments are really unexceptional. None of them are specific to this year, this life, this body, to my little worlds. They just happen to me. But they reminded me that breathing worlds refers to both a noun and a verb. We, humans and others, live in worlds that breathe. This is the background that's foregrounded, only sometimes intentionally, at every inhalation. But breathing worlds also refers to work, to labor, both individually and collectively. So I suppose this is what we were trying to curate when putting together Breathing Worlds at Modern Art Oxford. Some sense that breathing worlds are there to be cared for. And in some ways, this is what the curation, with the emphasis on the different meanings of that term, is about. It's about breathing as a way of caring for ourselves and the worlds in which, and maybe towards which we aspire. So that's all I'm going to say about my involvement in Breathworks. We have time now for some questions and discussion, which might begin with a question that was submitted by one of the original Breathworks participants, Caroline, who wanted to ask, and I suppose this question is directed to Lucy. Caroline asks, I wonder what the original intention for the Breathworks community project was, and you've, I guess, given us a sense of that, but what you felt the outcome has been, and whether the outcome really matched your original intention. So I'm going to ask Lucy to address that first question.
Thank you, Derek. Yes, so that's a really interesting question. I suppose I could answer it in terms of my own intention. Maybe I'll sort of reveal my own intention, which I've sort of been safeguarding throughout the project as a way to kind of keep that sense of integrity, so I keep returning back to this original question. And the original question, or I guess provocation I set for myself was, can I let breath speak for itself? So in terms of our evolution as a species and in our own lives, breath comes before speech. And it's been my own intuitive experience, and I've shared this and it's been affirmed by others, that there is a sort of tacit knowledge or intuition to breathing that's more honest than thoughts, really, because thoughts can be worldviews that we've internalized, but then on reflection don't actually agree with. I think breaths, like you were saying before, Derek, it's that idea of presencing, and as Patsy invited us to do earlier, to really check in with how you are, but also in that checking in, that turning inwards, you're also tuning into what's happening in your surroundings. So when these world events are going on and we're finding out about them through the news, or our own lives are being sort of turned upside down, our breathing, of course, responds to that. And it's actually a sort of sensory apparatus, a way of communicating, having an internal conversation. But then that also comes out in the way that we speak with others. So breath as paralinguistics, as someone created a beautiful breath work, Caroline actually, with the little sounds like m, p, all this sort of like halfway words, which we make these noises all the time. And it's a way of really creating, I guess, it's an honesty, because these are sort of deep reactions. So that's my kind of ethos to do with breathing. And I really wanted to keep that sense of integrity throughout the project as an artist, so that I knew that I was heading in the right direction, no matter what sort of form the project took as we adapted. So that was my intuition, but then the intention was also, of course, shared, because it was a participatory project and we were working as a team. So in that sense, I hope that my intention was shared by others, and I'd be interested at this point to open the question out to the group about whether we can let breath speak, and whether we can use creative forms to do so.
I think one of the interesting issues about breath and breathing, and it struck me as I was listening to everybody talk, is this the way in which everything that people were talking about went against the idea that breath and breathing is always something to be considered in relation to, say, violence, toxicity, pollution, etc. That there's a real risk that in the discourse about breath and breathing, it becomes so problematized that it's hard to extract any affirmative value from it. But what I think was clear from the different presentations, and also the initial breathing exercise, is that there's a way in which the rhythm of breathing is a kind of source of hope not just in a somatic practice like meditation or yoga, but also in singing, and then more widely through various artistic practices. And I really was struck by that way in which breathing is a potential for thinking and being otherwise, but that's not naive. It's far from naive. It's a really, really informed relationship with the possibilities of breathing.
I think to pick up, Derek, on what you said about the positive aspects of breath, I think that's, for me, you know, thinking about my mum and thinking about how just taking control of her breath really transformed her. I just think that generally now there's not enough weight is put on the importance of our breath. And also just in everyday life, how often do we kind of check in with ourselves and check in with how we're actually breathing, whether our inhale is stronger than our exhale, whether we're struggling, whether we can feel any effect from just simply breathing. You know, we know that it's this unconscious thing that we do. It's the thing that keeps us alive, but it's the thing that we hardly ever think about. And I think that, you know, projects like this really help you to focus in on this thing that we do, that we all do. And I think that's one of the things that was really beautiful about the Breathworks, you know, really hearing each person's connection to their breath and what that meant to them. I thought that was really powerful. So it was really lovely. Thank you, Lucy.
Oh, well, it was the community. It wasn't me, but thank you.
Well, your idea.
Well, I don't know if I answered the original question, which was whether the outcome matches the original intention. And I think that even though I could never have imagined the form that it has now taken, which was partly due to the ban on non-essential work and travel, and of course all the adjustments that we've all made and the changes in the art world towards focusing on the digital programming. But I think this core intention and the shared intention to let breath speak for itself and to see what kind of form it might take, I think that that's continued throughout the project. Well, I hope so anyway.
I think one thing that's really nice about the ideas that you come forward with is that kind of, and I guess Patsy's work as well, is the kind of connection between breath and the body. And I think that's, you know, like I was saying, when you see Dryden interviewed, he sort of says, you know, you get a particular sense of the body, because what he did was he drew his son, you know, without any clothes on, so you can see the actual, you know, as his lungs lift up and down. And it's quite interesting thinking about that in terms of what Patsy does, or meditation or yoga, where you're reconnecting with the sense of the body and breathing. And generally, I think in life, people tend to think about breathing in terms of being anxious, because they think, you know, when you all kind of get panicky about something, you know, you're all sort of feeling sort of, and it's quite nice to have that possibility of thinking about breathing in a very positive way that kind of relaxes rather than the tense side of it. So I think that's a really nice thing. And I liked when you were reading out some of the things, Lucy, I like this one about breathing alongside the plants. And I thought that was really nice, because obviously the other part of breathing is that plants do it, animals do it. We, you know, it's something that also holds us with nature. And I've had this amazing experience yesterday with digital, is that I'm doing some research for a project in Finland, and I spoke to a biochemist, and he was telling me that they're doing this incredible research, which will interest you, which is to look at the actual content of the air and how plants and animals are sending out spores and different things, tiny macroscopic things into the air, which change over time. And so we kind of take for granted everywhere that we go and how it is, but actually we're breathing in all this amazing stuff which changes, you know, changes in seasons, changes in which animals are around, all those kind of things. And it suddenly had this kind of view into a whole sort of perspective on air and breathing that was completely different from what I thought of before. But again, it's still that kind of sense of the body and how you relate to breathing.
Yes, I mean, I guess it's a breathing world, another breathing world that the chemist was giving you an insight into, I suppose.
Yeah, really amazing, really amazing. He did this chart showing all the things that were in this one bit of air, and that was just at one particular point, you know. And I mean, I've been reading quite a lot about biodiversity and nature and interaction with habitats and things. You know that the trees send out things into to stop other trees coming into where they are in a piece of woodland. They actually send stuff out into the air to stop. So I mean, there's amazing things we don't know about which connect us, you know, in terms of nature as well with breathing, which is really fascinating.
Definitely. And I think the act of conscious breathing draws our attention to that, to our embodiment, but also to the sort of the blurred boundaries between our bodies and the world, and whether that's, you know, a positive connection with nature, or whether it's a negative connection with pollution.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that you picked up on was the sound. And when we were working on both the projects, in particular, actually Human Sensor, Kasia was really keen that when we, what happened is the performers went through, Manchester was the first place that we did the project, and they ended up in a square, and they did a performance in the square, just dancing. And I think you might have seen the image with the visuals behind it. And what they danced to was that she recorded sounds of people breathing. So they're actually dancing to the so they're actually moving with the sounds of the breath. So the breath becomes the soundtrack to their moving. And that's kind of interesting as well, that the kind of rhythm of breathing then becomes the soundtrack that the dancers dance to. So I think there's some really interesting things around rhythm. Did it come out a little bit in some of the videos that people made as well, that sort of rhythm and sound?
Yes, it did, and we really wanted to emphasize it. So you may have seen in the breathworks that we chose this circular sound visualization, and that was our way to bring the images and sound that were submitted together. And the way that this visualization sort of pulsated inwards and outwards was like what corresponded with the sounds that the person submitted. So whether it was the sound of them breathing or bird song. It was interesting because some people did submit sounds of them breathing, which was really beautiful, but otherwise it might be poetry or spoken word or another interpretation. But I think that sound wave did quite a good job of kind of, you know, really emphasizing the fluttering breath and that rhythm. And like you're saying, that sort of, it's a biological rhythm. And I think we really respond to it because, you know, we're embodied, we have flesh. So when you hear that sound, well, for me anyway, just hearing the sounds of someone else breathing actually can have a really transformational, to use Patsy's word, effect on, you know, my state in that moment. And that's actually something that I wasn't expecting to happen so much throughout the course of this project. Every sort of bit of audio where I've heard someone breathing or another sound that they've submitted that sort of mimics or emulates breath, I hadn't realized the sort of potentially therapeutic effect it has to really, because of course listening to your own breath has that effect, but actually listening to other people's breath as well. So it's that sense of perhaps communion. Yeah.
I just wanted to return for a moment, Lucy, to the point that Alice made about all of these materials that are in the air that we're not aware of. It just reminded me of one of the pieces from which we drew when we were making this collage on the wall. The anthropologist Natasha Myers has a really lovely piece called How to Grow Livable Worlds, 10 Steps for Life in what she calls the Planthropocene, kind of a play on the term Anthropocene. And she makes a really, really strong case for reminding ourselves of the fact that the worlds that we inhabit were breathed into being by plants. And we tend to forget that. And then she draws upon another anthropologist, Timothy Choi, and his really, really provocative and kind of powerfully enigmatic idea of a conspiracy of breathers, how you could reclaim that notion of a conspiracy of breathers to try and think about what it might mean to breathe together when the breathers aren't just human, but they're also plants and trees, etc. So I was reminded of those ideas when you were talking about the conversation with the chemist.
Right, yeah, because conspiracy from Latin conspirare, as Choi explains, is broken down into to breathe together, is the meaning of the word. As part of the installations that I did at Modern Art Oxford, I also created a work called Conspiracy, which was different recordings of my own breath and then layered together to create an audio piece, which is currently in the yard space. It's kind of half indoors, half outdoors space at Modern Art Oxford. But again, I kind of thought about it as how could this artwork be participatory and how could it invite people to take part in it, even though it's, you know, just a set of speakers. And the idea in calling it Conspiracy was to include the visitor to the gallery, whoever they may be, in that moment of breathing together. And I think when I was, you know, talking to the tech guys and we were doing all the setup, just hearing, it was a bit eerie hearing the sounds of my own breath in the background, but you could tell that it did have a very much a bodily effect on people just to hear the sounds of breathing in the background.
I think we've actually got a question from YouTube. I think it's directed at Derek. How do we promote the importance of breath, breathing, self-connection and self-awareness in schools and education? More specifically, especially as young people are in a highly stressful situation?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that question, given the fact that I don't teach at a second level or primary level, and I'm not entirely aware of, I suppose, what sorts of activities go on in schools around maybe mindfulness or moments of pause. I should really ask my partner because she's a teacher, but I'm sure there's some kind of micro interventions that take place in order to calm or settle people, settle children. But there does seem to be many different ways in which breath or breathing could be a vehicle through which you could explore a range of different questions to do with the conditions of the worlds that children live in. You know, everything from chemistry to botany, but also you could begin to introduce political questions, I think, in a very, very gentle way. For instance, just to think about you know, who has the right to breathe? To pose that simple question, I think, is the sort of question that kids would be really interested in. Like, what should the right to breathe be a kind of universal right in the same way that other forms of rights are? I mean, those are the sorts of discussions that kids love, and that's a question posed in a recent piece by Kele Mbembe. So I think by engaging children's interest, you can ask actually quite profound questions about what it means to partake of the world and who has the capacity and right to partake in the resources that surround them. That's a very long-winded and not a very practical answer to the question. I'm sure other people have much better answers, but thanks very much for the question.
I think I want to just touch back on something you said at the beginning there, Derek, which was this idea about mindfulness in schools and meditation in schools. And it's not something, again, I mean, I don't have any connection to schools anymore. My daughter's grown up, but you know, I think that going forward, I think that this is something that really should be encouraged. I think it's something that is beginning to happen. I've got a friend who is trying to do that now. She's trying to go into schools and she's trying to bring meditation and mindfulness into schools. There's lots of courses out there for yoga teachers to kind of, you know, develop their skills and work with children. And I think in terms of promoting the importance of breath, what better way to actually get children sitting with their breath, you know, and kind of making that connection, like Alice mentioned, between their bodies and how they feel and how they breathe. And I think that if we could just get them while they're young, maybe we can actually affect some change in the world. I've got this really funny little image, and it's of a man sitting down with a little girl sitting next to him, and they're both kind of in easy pose. I don't know why they call it easy pose, it's not easy. And they're literally sitting there, and underneath it says something like, you know, if everyone meditated, we wouldn't have half the problems that we have in the world right now. And I truly believe that. And I actually think that the key here is to get meditators into schools and actually bring it into the curriculum. You know, in the same way we've got all these other things, this is really important. And I think that it's an important tool, not just for your own health, but for your mental health. It's really an effective tool to help with your mental health. So I think for me, that would be the answer.
I agree on the importance of bringing meditation and breathing into schools, of course, especially at the moment when you know, learning might be partly digital now, and of course children are, you know, probably, you know, quite affected by COVID-19 and will be affected in the future in ways that we can't imagine in terms of how they've had to adapt. And I think particularly if you could unite sort of what Patsy was saying with what Derek was saying as well, the idea that you could ask children to young people to breathe mindfully, and then perhaps pose the question, you know, who has the right to breathe? And it introduces that sense of maybe embodied thinking, or that sense of sort of like bodily integrity, where these perhaps abstract questions about human rights in the classroom suddenly have a locus in your own person, in your own experience. Yeah, I think that could be a good tool.
I mean, one issue around which children are really thinking about this is something that Alice raised earlier in her discussion, is just air pollution. I mean, children are increasingly acutely aware of the effects of idling cars beside their schools. I mean, certainly around Oxford, it's something that is really mobilizing them in quite obvious ways. And to some extent, I think they're ahead of their parents or carers about that issue because it's just in their face, and you know, that's a slightly separate issue from meditation, from kind of centering yourself in relation to breath, but it's part of how the relationship between breath and worlds is being made palpable or visible to young people. You know, I've had run-ins with people who are idling beside a school down the road. You know, it's something that people get very tense about, but it'll be increasingly difficult to engage in certain practices, or just leave your car idling when it's obvious that it's beside a school. And there's some recent research by a geographer at UCL, Seth Gustafsson, who has a paper in Transactions of the Institute of British Geographers, which is about just the simple fact that if you're young, you're closer to the ground, the air is more polluted. I mean, these things really matter. So there are lots of ways in which you could, I suppose, introduce children to those sorts of issues as part of their own growing understanding of and sensitivity to those kinds of questions.
And particularly in matters of measuring air pollution as well, because when we have those standardized criteria for measuring air pollution, we say, oh, today, you know, the forecast on London Air or wherever you look, it's good, and tomorrow it's going to be, you know, not so good. And then who are we sort of measuring that air? Who are we saying that air is breathable for? Is it breathable for children who obviously have a different reaction? You know, the toxins in the air, that they're less exposure is more to them. So it's the question of, again, coming back to the universal right to breathe, and who are the breathers ultimately, which was one of the questions that we asked ourselves when we were curating the Breathing Worlds research. Who are the breathers? These were 3 questions that Derek came up with. Under which conditions do they breathe, and how could we make those conditions tangible? And I think but awareness of breathing, I mean, yes, in terms of like your relationship with managing your emotions, and that own sort of ability to overcome any sort of like stress that you may be facing, or at least manage it, is important. But also, could breath awareness be something that can become political? And it already is, sort of, it's being politicized, especially this year. And breathlessness has been a recurrent theme throughout the year in terms of COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter, and also the forest fires as well, and turning the skies orange in the States. So I guess it comes back to the idea of getting kids to breathe is great, and maybe that could then lead into broader conversations with a really wide-reaching implications.
I think the other thing that's interesting about air pollution is it is something we can do something about. During the lockdown, air pollution levels went down 30%, across big places like London, big cities, and it is actually something. Some of the environmental problems are ones that are going to take years to get. For example, going over to renewable energy is not something we can solve today, but actually air pollution is one that we could really take action on, and people could, behave in a different way. The difficult thing is that, as everyone knows, after the lockdown, what's happened is everyone's got in their cars. People aren't using public transport for understandable reasons with what's going on with COVID. But the difficulty is then everyone's got back in their cars. So, there are kind of big decisions, aren't there, for everybody to discuss. It's quite interesting what you were saying, Derek, about school, the idling outside the schools. One of the first things I discovered when we were working with the air pollution scientists is the actual playgrounds are more polluted than the surrounding streets, which I think is one of the statistics that just hit me completely. Like, we can't carry on living like this. What happens is, you have a school, you have, 100 kids in the school, if it's a small primary school, or 200 kids. The parents come along, they sit outside their own children's playground, and then the air pollution goes into the school, and they do it twice a day. So you imagine all that air pollution coming into a playground. Often playgrounds are quite in dips, and so the air pollution goes straight into the playground. And a lot of schools have been built next to busy roads as well. So there's all sorts of issues there, which really are things that we need to think about for the future. And where schools are situated, the way we travel, people driving their kids to school and then polluting their own children, raising issues of also, as well as climate change. There's also all the problems with asthma for young children, and rates of asthma and those sort of things are aggravated by air pollution. So there's big things there that I think we can look at. And also the other thing is, just on a personal level, if people have got young children, is just take those back streets. And one of the things that we learned with, if you look at some of these amazing apps, I mean, if you're in London, there's the London Air website, but most towns, actually, if you go on their air pollution, the local authority will tell you, you can just see from a busy road to a small road, the air pollution drops dramatically, really dramatically, and avoid roundabouts and big junctions. That's where all the air pollution just goes straight up. If you look at any map of air pollution, that's what happens. So there are sort of practical things you can do as well. Hello, Emma.
Hello. Thank you all so much. Is there any final comments you'd like to add into the discussion at this final moment?
No, I think thank you for hosting a really brilliant project. I think it's really been, I've just been so impressed with all the different interactions from the public and how people have really engaged with the project. It seems like a really, I don't know where Lucy's going to take it next, but it's really interesting to see how she develops it.
Yeah, it's an incredibly thought-provoking project. I mean, the discussion here has been wonderful, and thank you so much to Lucy Sabin and Patsy Isles, Alice Sharp and Derek McCormack. The project itself is so thought-provoking. I know that I've certainly thought about different forms of breath in different ways than I normally would, just because it somehow plays within the imagination over a longer period, this project. And also, just as has been talked about today, the way that physiologically, do we understand ourselves well enough and exactly what's happening each breath through the day, and how that connects into wider systems of biology, ecology and pollution and the geopolitics around that. The complexity of this, I think, has made people shy away from it over time as regards politics. And it's beautiful hearing you discuss things in terms of really making clear that there's so much we do know, but there's so much more we don't yet know, and things to discover throughout this century that hopefully will get kick-started by coming at ideas of air and breath in such different ways. I'd like to thank a couple of people from behind the scenes of this project as well. So particular thanks to my colleague, Andre Latham, who's our curator of digital, and she worked closely with Lucy and Derek to really realise this project in its public form. And our great partners as well at Torch, and particularly with this event, behind the scenes managing it are Holly and Nikki, and great thanks to them. It's useful for people to be aware that you may have picked up already that Breathworks is currently featured in an exhibition at Modern Art Oxford, which is called Responsive Space. And that presents socially engaged art projects that have been done by some of our associate artists through to 2020. And the socially engaged projects are those in which a project concept or frame has been set, and then people have been invited to contribute within that. Now that display is on until January 2021, so you can come along and see it in person, or you can just enjoy it online with Breathworks, which is the beauty of that project. And now, to conclude our event all together, I would like to ask Patsy to kindly lead us again in a collective breathing exercise. So Patsy.
Thank you, Emma. So we're going to do an exercise that is a more relaxing breathing exercise now. And it's very simple. It's literally just long, deep breathing, but it's what we call the yogic breath. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is to, again, sit up nice and straight, nice straight spine, relax shoulders. Just make sure that your chin is parallel to the floor. I'm going to ask you to put your right hand on your abdomen and your left hand on your chest, because the three-part yogic breath is about first filling the abdomen, so your abdomen should rise under your hand. And as you continue to inhale, your chest should expand, so you could feel that with your left hand. And then continuing that inhale, the base of the neck lifts. And when we exhale, the base of the neck falls, the chest contracts, and the abdomen falls. So just connecting with your breath and connecting with your body, with your hands, I'm going to invite you now to close down your eyes. And I'm going to just start by guiding you through a couple of breaths, and then just allowing you to breathe at your own pace, just taking your time and really connecting with your body. So let's inhale, feeling that abdomen rise, the chest expand, the base of the neck lift. Exhale, base of the neck just falls, chest contracts, abdomen falls. Inhale, fill the abdomen, expand the chest, lift the neck. Exhale, neck falls, chest contracts, abdomen sinks. One more time. Inhale into the abdomen, abdomen rises, chest expands, neck lifts. Exhale, neck falls, chest contracts, abdomen sinks. And just continue breathing deeply into your abdomen, chest, neck, and exhaling through the neck, the chest, the abdomen. Continuing to breathe deeply, noticing any changes in your body, noticing how your body feels as you breathe, giving thanks for your breath, and just continuing your breath at your own pace, deeply inhaling and deeply exhaling. Continuing that breath, allowing it to lengthen and deepen. Feeling peace, feeling comfortable with your breath. Just imagining that the breath is filling all areas of the body, every cell, right to the fingertips and the toes. Imagine that breath filling even the follicles on your head. 2, 3. Now, making your next inhale your last inhale, breathing deeply into your abdomen, allowing the chest to expand, base of the neck lift, hold at the top. And as you exhale, releasing the neck, contracting the chest, and feeling your abdomen sink. And just bringing both of your hands down to your thighs, just resting those comfortably on your thighs, and just allowing your breath to return to normal. Without control, just noticing how your breath feels, noticing any changes. And as soon as you're ready, slowly blinking the eyes open. Lovely. So thank you everyone, and it's good night from me.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining us. All the speakers, absolutely wonderful with your gifts of insight. Thank you so much. And to all of you who are watching on YouTube too, thank you so much, and goodbye to all of you.